My beloved child, something changed today, and the most important part is not what the third party tried to do, it is what your soulmate finally understood because of it. There was a moment, quiet and almost ordinary from the outside, when a small detail reached them that should have been easy to dismiss. A sentence repeated differently. A conversation that suddenly did not match what they had been told before. A piece of information arriving from someone who had no reason to exaggerate. At first, your soulmate simply paused. They did not react dramatically. They did not immediately confront anyone. They just sat with that strange feeling that appears when two pieces of a story refuse to fit together. And somewhere inside that silence, a question formed: why was I never supposed to know this? That question changed the atmosphere completely. Because for a long time, your soulmate had been trying to understand distance, mixed signals, strange timing, and certain moments when something genuine between you seemed to become complicated for reasons neither of you could fully explain. They had blamed timing. They had blamed misunderstanding. At times, they may even have wondered whether they had imagined the depth of the connection altogether. But today gave them a different possibility, one that felt less dramatic than they expected, yet far more meaningful. Someone had been shaping the information around them. Not controlling their life. Not deciding their future. Something subtler than that. A comment here. A suggestion there. A carefully incomplete version of something you had supposedly said or done. And once your soulmate noticed the pattern, they could not stop seeing it. Don't skip, because what they discovered next is the reason they now feel they have to warn you before another misunderstanding has the chance to grow. The surprising part is that your soulmate did not become angry first. They became reflective. They started replaying old conversations with a new awareness. One memory returned more clearly than the others, a time when they had been ready to move closer to you emotionally, only for the third party to suddenly bring them a piece of information that made them hesitate. Back then, it sounded believable because it contained just enough truth to feel convincing. But today, your soulmate realized something they had completely missed. The true part of the story had been used to make the untrue part sound believable. And that realization stayed with them. It was not a loud revelation. It was the kind that makes a person become very still. The kind that causes them to look at an old message, then another, and notice how differently everything reads when one hidden assumption is removed. Maybe you know that feeling too. Maybe there have been moments when you sensed something was slightly off, but you could never explain why without sounding like you were overthinking. Maybe a person suddenly became distant after things had been warm. Maybe an expected conversation never happened. Maybe you felt that your intentions were being misunderstood before you even had the chance to explain them. If so, this is where the story becomes more personal than it first appeared. Because what your soulmate discovered today was not simply that someone interfered. They discovered how easily silence can become filled with somebody else's version of the truth. And suddenly they understood something about you that they wish they had understood earlier. Your quietness was not indifference. Your hesitation was not rejection. Your decision not to chase every misunderstanding was not proof that you did not care. In some moments, you were simply refusing to fight against stories you had never been invited to hear. That realization affected them more deeply than anything the third party actually said. Stay till the end, because the warning your soulmate wants to give you is connected to one final detail they uncovered, and that detail has changed what they plan to do next. Earlier today, your soulmate received or noticed something that seemed insignificant. Perhaps it was an old screenshot, a forwarded message, a remembered sentence, or a casual correction from someone who happened to know the full context. Whatever form it took, it exposed a contradiction. The third party had once claimed that you had pulled away for one reason. But the timeline showed something different. Your soulmate remembered exactly when your behavior changed, and it happened after they themselves had become distant. For the first time, they considered the possibility that both of you had been reacting to the same misunderstanding from opposite sides. Think about how strange that is. Two people can care, both can remain silent, both can assume the other made a choice, and all the while, neither realizes that the original assumption was never accurate. Your soulmate kept returning to that thought. What if we were both waiting for clarity that neither of us knew we needed to give? And then came the part that truly unsettled their certainty about the past. They remembered something the third party had told them recently, something about you that sounded unusually urgent. Yet today, when they looked closer, the claim was not supported by anything you had actually done. It was an interpretation presented as a fact. That distinction mattered. It mattered enough that your soulmate stopped asking, "Why would you do that?" and began asking, "Did you even do what I was told you did?" That is a very different question. And sometimes one different question is enough to open an entirely different future. There is something important waiting for you in this realization. Your soulmate is no longer looking only at what they heard about you. They are beginning to compare it with what they personally experienced with you. Your tone. Your consistency. The moments when you showed care without demanding anything in return. The times your actions did not match the version of you they had been given. Slowly, those memories are becoming more trustworthy to them than second-hand explanations. And this is where their emotions changed. They stopped feeling confused and started feeling protective of the truth. Not protective in a dramatic way. Protective in the sense that they no longer want important decisions to be built on incomplete information. That is why the words forming in their mind are so simple: "I have to warn you." But the warning is probably not what you imagine. It is not meant to frighten you. It is not about telling you to distrust everyone around you. It is far more grounded than that. Your soulmate wants you to know that if something unusual reaches you, an unexpected message, a confusing statement, a claim about what they supposedly feel or intend, they do not want you to accept it without giving reality a chance to speak for itself. They have seen today how easily assumptions can travel faster than honest conversation. And now they fear that the same pattern could reach you before they have the opportunity to correct it. So in their mind, the warning sounds almost like a confession: "Please don't make a decision about me based only on what someone else tells you. I made that mistake once." Notice what is changing here. They are not placing themselves above you. They are admitting that their own judgment became clouded because they trusted information that seemed convincing at the time. That humility is important. It means this discovery is not simply giving them somebody to blame. It is forcing them to take responsibility for the moments when they could have asked you directly but chose silence instead. And that is where something tender begins to emerge beneath the mystery. Your soulmate is realizing that what they truly want is not revenge, confrontation, or a dramatic ending with the third party. They want clarity with you. They want a conversation where neither of you has to guess. A conversation where no one speaks on your behalf and no one speaks on theirs. And perhaps that is why today feels so different. Because for the first time, the third party's actions did not create more distance. They accidentally revealed the weakness in the distance that already existed. The misunderstanding depended on both of you remaining apart. The moment direct truth enters the room, that misunderstanding begins to lose its power. Your soulmate knows this now. What they do not know yet is how you will respond when they finally explain everything. That uncertainty makes them hesitate. Their phone may be nearby. Your name may have crossed their mind more than once. They may have written something and deleted it because the first version sounded too emotional, then written something shorter because they were afraid of overwhelming you. And beneath every unfinished sentence is the same private realization: I should have asked them sooner. There is a strange softness in regret when it becomes useful. Regret can keep someone trapped in the past, or it can teach them how to show up differently in the next moment. Your soulmate appears to be standing exactly between those two choices. Today showed them what happened. The next step will show you what they learned from it. But there is one detail they have not fully processed yet. One thing the third party did today was not aimed at your soulmate at all. It was connected directly to you. And when your soulmate realized that, the words, "I have to warn you," stopped being merely a thought and became something they knew they could no longer keep to themselves. The detail your soulmate discovered was almost too small to notice at first, and that is exactly why it mattered so much. It was not some dramatic announcement or obvious confrontation. It was a quiet attempt to influence what would reach you next. The third party had been preparing a version of the story that placed your soulmate in a completely different light, a version designed to make you believe they had already made a decision they had never actually made. And when your soulmate realized this, something inside them shifted immediately. They understood that the confusion was no longer staying on their side of the connection. It was beginning to move toward you. That was the moment the thought became urgent in their mind: I have to tell them before they misunderstand me too. But even then, they did not rush. They wanted to be certain. So they began checking what had really happened, comparing words, remembering conversations, and separating what they personally knew from what they had simply been told. And with every piece they examined, one truth became harder to ignore: the third party had not needed to invent an entirely false story. They only needed to rearrange real moments until those moments seemed to mean something else. That was the clever part. A delayed reply could become, "They don't care." A quiet day could become, "They have moved on." A private hesitation could become, "They have chosen someone else." And suddenly your soulmate saw how many of their own decisions had been shaped by interpretations instead of conversations. Don't skip, because what happened next was not about the third party anymore. It was about the moment your soulmate finally started remembering you without anybody else's voice inside the memory. They thought about the way you had shown up before the misunderstandings began. They remembered the small things, the things people rarely fake because they happen too naturally: the way you listened, the way you noticed details, the way certain conversations with you carried a calmness they had never been able to explain. They remembered moments when you could have reacted harshly but chose restraint instead. Moments when you could have demanded answers but stepped back because you sensed they were overwhelmed. And as those memories returned, another question surfaced quietly: what if I misunderstood their strength as distance? That question reached somewhere deep. Because your soulmate had spent so much time trying to interpret what you did not say that they had forgotten to honor what you had already shown. And now, with the third party's influence becoming clearer, those old memories were changing shape. What once looked like indifference now looked like dignity. What once looked like emotional distance now looked like someone protecting their peace. What once looked like hesitation now looked like a person waiting for something genuine rather than forcing something uncertain. That realization softened them. It also made them aware of how much they wanted to speak to you without the weight of anyone else's opinion between you. Stay till the end, because the warning they want to give you is connected to a message that almost reached you today, and if it had reached you without context, you might have misunderstood everything. Your soulmate learned that the third party had either planned to tell you, imply to you, or allow you to believe that your soulmate had completely closed the door. The wording itself may have sounded calm. That is what made it dangerous to clarity. It would not have looked like interference. It would have looked like information. Something simple. Something believable. Something that could make you quietly step away without ever realizing you were stepping away from a story your soulmate had never personally told you. Imagine how easily that could happen. You receive one sentence. You respect it. You decide not to interfere. You protect your dignity and move forward. Meanwhile, your soulmate is somewhere else wondering why your energy suddenly changed, never realizing you were simply reacting to what you thought they had chosen. That possibility stayed with them. Not because they wanted to control what you do, but because they finally understood how silence had been working against both of you. And for the first time, they became afraid of repeating the same mistake, not afraid in the sense of panic, but deeply aware that another misunderstanding could cost both of you an honest opportunity. So they started thinking about how to reach you clearly. Not with dramatic promises. Not with an emotional speech designed to overwhelm you. Just truth. They wanted to say, if you hear something about me, please give me the chance to tell you what is real. There is something unusually mature hidden inside that sentence. Your soulmate is no longer trying to control the outcome. They are asking for a fair conversation. And that difference matters. They know you may have questions. They know you may carry your own disappointment. They know that discovering the truth does not erase every moment when they were distant or uncertain. But they also know something else now: if they continue hiding behind confusion, then the third party will not even need to do anything more. The silence itself will finish the work. That realization has become impossible for them to ignore. Somewhere between reviewing what happened today and thinking about how you might receive it, your soulmate began to understand that warning you is only the first step. The deeper step is telling you what they actually feel. And this is where their certainty becomes less comfortable. Because exposing what the third party did is easier than exposing what your soulmate has been hiding inside themselves. It is easier to say, someone gave me the wrong impression, than to say, I cared enough for that impression to hurt me. Easier to say, there was confusion, than to admit, I was scared of losing something I had not yet learned how to protect. Easier to explain another person's actions than to explain why your name still carries weight in their heart. Something important is waiting for you here. Your soulmate is beginning to realize that they cannot warn you honestly without revealing why your understanding matters so much to them. And that is the part they were not prepared for. They thought today would simply expose a misunderstanding. Instead, it exposed attachment. It exposed regret. It exposed how deeply they still care about what you think of them. That truth is making them reconsider conversations they once avoided. They are remembering the times they almost reached out. The message they nearly sent. The question they wanted to ask but convinced themselves would sound too vulnerable. They are remembering all the moments when pride disguised itself as patience. And for perhaps the first time, they are seeing the cost of waiting too long for perfect timing. Because perfect timing never arrived. What arrived instead was today a messy, unexpected discovery that forced them to confront the very conversation they had been postponing. Yet there is something beautiful about that too. Sometimes clarity does not arrive when everything is calm. Sometimes it arrives because something finally becomes impossible to ignore. Your soulmate has reached that point. They can no longer pretend that what happened between you was simply a natural fading away. Too many pieces no longer support that story. Too many old moments make sense differently now. Too many questions remain unanswered. And beneath all of them is one quiet realization: we never really got to speak without interference. That sentence is becoming the center of everything. The third party may have influenced perceptions, but your soulmate is now beginning to understand that the future does not have to remain trapped inside those perceptions. They can choose differently. They can ask instead of assume. They can speak instead of withdraw. They can allow you to decide what you think based on their own words rather than someone else's interpretation. And just as this new determination started settling in, your soulmate uncovered one more thing, something they had not been searching for at all. Hidden inside an older conversation was evidence that the third party had known much earlier that your soulmate still had feelings for you. Not guessed. Not suspected. Knew. And the way they discovered that truth changed the entire meaning of what happened today, because suddenly the interference did not look random anymore. It looked connected to a private admission your soulmate made long ago, an admission about you they never intended anyone to repeat. That private admission was never meant to become part of anyone else's story, and yet today your soulmate finally understood how much it had shaped what happened afterward. Long before the confusion became obvious, there had been a quiet conversation in which your soulmate admitted something simple but deeply personal: they had never fully stopped thinking about you. They did not describe it dramatically. They did not make promises about the future. They simply acknowledged that your presence still mattered to them in a way they could not easily explain. At the time, they believed those words would remain where they were spoken. But now they realized the third party somehow became aware of that admission, and suddenly several old moments begin to look completely different. The strange questions. The unexpected comments about you. The subtle attempts to redirect your soulmate's attention whenever your name appeared. The moments when they were encouraged to leave the past alone, before they had even decided what the past meant to them. None of it proves that every difficult moment came from one person, and your soulmate understands that. They are not rewriting history just to create someone to blame. What unsettles them is something far more realistic: they allowed another person's interpretations to become louder than their own experience with you. And now they are wondering how differently things might have unfolded if they had trusted themselves sooner. Don't skip, because the warning they want to give you has changed again. At first, they wanted to warn you about what the third party might say. Now they want to warn you about something deeper. Appearances can become convincing when two people stop speaking directly. Your soulmate sees that clearly today. They can also see their own role in allowing the silence to continue. They remember one particular moment when they almost contacted you. Your name was already on the screen. The message had been written halfway. It was not even complicated. Something like, "Can I ask you something honestly?" But they never sent it. A few hours earlier, they had heard a comment suggesting you were happier without them, and instead of asking whether that was true, they decided respecting your supposed choice was the mature thing to do. For a long time, they felt proud of that restraint. Today, they are questioning it. What if they were not respecting your decision at all? What if they were respecting someone else's description of your decision? That difference has landed heavily. And perhaps this is why they suddenly understand something about you too. There may have been times when you were waiting for one clear signal from them while they were waiting for one clear signal from you. Both of you protecting your dignity. Both of you refusing to force anything. Both of you believing the other had already chosen a direction. Meanwhile, the space between you became filled with assumptions that neither of you had personally confirmed. Your soulmate keeps returning to that possibility because it explains something they could never understand before, why the connection felt emotionally unfinished even when the circumstances suggested it should have been over. There was never a true ending conversation. No honest moment where both people placed everything on the table and said, "This is what I feel. This is what I want. This is what I cannot offer." Instead, there were fragments. Distance. Interpretations. Half-answers. And now today has brought those fragments back into focus. Stay till the end, because something your soulmate found in that older conversation gave them one reason to believe the third party may have been more concerned about your connection than they ever admitted. Your soulmate remembered that after making that private admission about still caring for you, they were asked an unusual question: if they reached out tomorrow, would you answer? At the time, it sounded casual. Your soulmate gave an equally casual answer. They said they probably would. Nothing more. Yet soon afterward, the information they heard about you began changing. Suddenly they were told you had emotionally moved on. Then they heard you wanted space. Later, they were given the impression that contacting you might only reopen something you no longer wanted. Each statement sounded reasonable on its own. Taken together, however, they created one powerful conclusion: do not reach out. And that is exactly what your soulmate did. They stayed away, thinking they were honoring your peace. Now they are questioning whether that conclusion ever belonged to you. This realization does not make them want to rush into your life. In fact, it makes them more careful. They understand that discovering possible interference does not automatically mean they know everything you feel today. Time has passed. People grow. Priorities change. You have your own life and your own perspective, and your soulmate knows they must respect that. What has changed is their willingness to stop pretending they already know your answer without asking the question. That is the quiet courage beginning to rise inside them. They do not want to assume you still feel something. They do not want to assume you do not. They simply want truth to come from the correct source. From you. And perhaps that is why the message forming inside them is becoming more honest with every hour. It is no longer, I need to expose what happened. It is becoming, I need to tell you what I should have told you myself. Something important is waiting for you in that shift, because your soulmate has realized that correcting the past without changing their behavior would mean very little. If they truly learned something today, they have to communicate differently tomorrow. They have to stop sending feelings through silence and expecting you to interpret them correctly. They have to stop allowing pride to masquerade as patience. They have to stop assuming that protecting themselves from rejection is more important than giving both of you clarity. And as they sat with that realization, another memory surfaced, one they had almost forgotten. There was a day when you said something very ordinary that stayed with them far longer than you probably realized. You may have told them that honesty matters more than perfect timing, or that people should simply say what they mean instead of making others guess. At the time, your soulmate heard the words. Today, they finally understand them. Because perfect timing has been the excuse behind so many unfinished moments. They were going to speak when things became calmer. They were going to explain when they felt more certain. They were going to ask about you when circumstances became less complicated. But life kept moving, and silence became easier to maintain than honesty. Until today. Today disrupted that comfort. Today made silence feel more risky than speaking. Not because anything terrible is about to happen, but because your soulmate finally understands what can be lost when people wait too long to clarify what matters. The warning they want to give you now is gentle. If something reaches you about them, allow room for direct truth before deciding what it means. But beneath that warning is a second message they are still gathering the courage to say. I never stopped caring as completely as you may have believed. That sentence frightens them more than anything the third party did because it belongs entirely to them. Nobody can be blamed for it. Nobody can explain it away. It is simply something they have carried quietly. And when they finally admit it, they will also have to accept that you are free to respond however feels right for you. Strangely, that realization is not pushing them away anymore. It is making them more sincere. They are beginning to understand that honesty is not a tool for controlling an outcome. It is a way of respecting another person enough to give them the truth. And your soulmate wants to give you that respect now. They want you to know what happened today, but they also want you to know where they stand. They want to tell you which parts of the story were misunderstood, which choices they regret, and which feelings remained even when they acted as if everything had become simple. Yet just as they began imagining that conversation, they noticed one final detail in the old exchange, a sentence from the third party that your soulmate had dismissed completely at the time. It was only 7 words, but reading it today made them stop cold because it suggested the third party had been expecting you to receive a message that your soulmate never sent. And now your soulmate has one new question they cannot ignore. If they never sent that message, who did? The question stayed with your soulmate longer than they expected, because the more they thought about it, the less comfortable the old version of events became. If they never sent that message, then somewhere along the way, somebody may have allowed you to believe words came from them that they never personally chose. And suddenly your soulmate was no longer only reviewing memories. They were reviewing tone, timing, and the little inconsistencies they once ignored because they seemed too small to matter. One message had sounded unusually final. Another had used language they would never normally use with you. A third appeared at exactly the moment they were being encouraged not to contact you. None of this gave them a complete answer yet, and they knew better than to jump to conclusions. But it gave them something just as important, a reason to stop assuming the past had been as simple as it looked. That realization brought a strange calm over them. Not relief exactly. More like the quiet certainty that comes when someone finally understands what question they should have been asking all along. They were no longer asking, "Why did everything fall apart?" They were asking, which parts of what happened actually came from us? And that question opened a door they had kept closed for far too long. Don't skip, because your soulmate's next move was not confrontation. It was verification. They went back to what they knew directly. They remembered the last conversation where they could clearly recognize your voice, your intentions, your emotional rhythm. They separated those moments from everything that came afterward through other people, assumptions, or incomplete explanations. And something unexpected happened. The clearer they became about what was truly yours, the less distant you felt in their memory. The version of you they had been carrying was partly built from second-hand information. But the person they actually knew had been more thoughtful, more measured, and more emotionally present than that version allowed. Your soulmate began to see how unfair it had been to judge your heart through interpretations you never had the opportunity to correct. And then a realization surfaced that made them sit with silence for several minutes. Maybe you had been protecting yourself too. Maybe when the energy around them changed, you noticed. Maybe when replies became colder or conversations became less direct, you chose not to chase someone who appeared to be pulling away. Perhaps you did exactly what they believed they were doing, respecting what seemed like the other person's choice. Two people could have been trying to do the honorable thing while unknowingly moving farther apart. That possibility did not erase what happened, but it changed the meaning of it. Stay till the end, because this is where the title's warning becomes something much more personal. Your soulmate does want to warn you about what the third party may have done today, but they also want to warn you against making the same mistake they made allowing another person to become the translator of someone else's heart. They do not want you to hear, "They don't care," when they never said it. They do not want you to hear, "They have chosen a different path," when they are still trying to understand their own path. Most of all, they do not want silence to be interpreted as certainty anymore. Because their silence was never as simple as it appeared. Some of it came from pride. Some came from confusion. Some came from believing they were doing the respectful thing. And some came from the fear that reaching toward you might reopen feelings they had never truly resolved. That is not an excuse. Your soulmate knows that. If anything, today has made them more aware of how much responsibility belongs to them. They cannot change the conversations they avoided, but they can choose not to avoid the next one. That is why the message they are thinking about sending now is different from all the unfinished drafts before it. It is not designed to impress you. It is not filled with dramatic promises. It begins with accountability. Something close to, "I found out today that I may have misunderstood more than I realized, and I don't want someone else speaking for me anymore." Imagine the courage hidden inside such a simple sentence. It admits uncertainty without weakness. It opens a door without demanding you walk through it. It tells you that your soulmate is finally willing to let truth be more important than protecting their image. And once they imagined saying that to you, another layer of emotion arrived. They started wondering what you had believed all this time. Had you thought they stopped caring? Had you assumed their distance meant they had forgotten you? Had you ever looked at your own phone, almost reached out, then decided not to because you believed the answer had already been given? The idea affected them deeply because suddenly your silence did not look empty either. It looked like it might have contained questions very similar to their own. Something important is waiting for you, because the next discovery was not about a message at all. It was about timing. Your soulmate noticed that every time they had come close to seeking clarity with you, the third party seemed to introduce a new reason to delay. Once it was that you supposedly needed space. Another time it was that contacting you would be inconvenient. Later it became the idea that enough time had passed and reopening things would only complicate both lives. Each suggestion sounded considerate. That was why your soulmate accepted them. But today they noticed the pattern. Every piece of advice led to the same outcome: continued silence. And when different reasons always produce the exact same result, sometimes the result itself deserves attention. Your soulmate is paying attention now. Still, rather than turning the third party into an enemy, they are beginning to understand something more useful. Nobody should have had that much influence over a conversation that belonged between the two of you. That is the lesson they cannot ignore anymore. The third party may have had opinions, motives, misunderstandings, or even their own emotional reasons for acting the way they did. But your soulmate sees now that the healthiest response is not to spend endless energy analyzing that person. It is to remove the space where outside interpretations were able to grow. Directness, clarity, conversation. Those are the things they avoided before, and those are exactly the things they now feel drawn toward. What if the real turning point today was never the discovery itself? What if it was the moment your soulmate finally stopped asking everybody else what your connection meant and decided that only the two people inside it could answer that question? That thought has become surprisingly powerful for them. They can feel something inside their perspective becoming simpler. You may care. You may not. You may want to talk. You may prefer distance. But whatever the truth is, your soulmate no longer wants to learn it through rumor, assumption, or somebody else's interpretation. They want to hear it from you. And they are finally prepared to give you the same courtesy. There is tenderness in that decision because it means letting go of control. Your soulmate cannot determine your response. They cannot rewrite every misunderstanding. They cannot demand that time suddenly disappear. But they can show up differently. They can say what is theirs to say. They can explain what they learned today. They can warn you gently that some information may not have represented their real thoughts. Then they can let you decide what everything means from there. That is why their warning has become almost peaceful now. If something reaches you that doesn't sound like me, please ask me before believing it. No drama. No pressure. Just a request for direct truth. And beneath it sits the confession they keep circling around, the one they know they cannot hide behind explanations forever. I still care what happens between us. Those words have become impossible to separate from everything else. They explain why today mattered. They explain why your soulmate checked the old conversations instead of simply dismissing them. They explain why the possibility of you misunderstanding them feels so important. And they explain why they are finally willing to risk an uncomfortable conversation rather than accept another comfortable silence. Yet one unresolved piece remains. Your soulmate still does not know whether the message that appeared to come from them ever actually reached you, or whether it was only being prepared. And while searching for that answer, they found something even more revealing, a draft containing a detail about your relationship that only a very small number of people should have known. That means somebody had not merely been guessing from the outside. They had been listening closely for a long time. And your soulmate has just realized exactly where that private detail came from. The private detail came from a conversation your soulmate had once trusted completely, and realizing that changed the emotional weight of everything. It was not something publicly known. It was not something a stranger could have guessed. It was a small memory about you, almost insignificant on the surface, but deeply recognizable to the two of you. Maybe it was a phrase you once used, a place connected to an important moment, or something you had shared during a conversation when neither of you expected anyone else to care. Your soulmate remembered mentioning it casually to the third party months ago, believing they were speaking in confidence. And now there it was, appearing inside a message that seemed designed to sound as though it came directly from your soulmate. That is when the pieces stopped feeling random. They still refused to assume the worst, because they knew one discovery could be misunderstood just as easily as everything else had been. But they also knew they could no longer dismiss what they were seeing. Someone had enough personal information to create something believable. Someone understood which memories would make you pause and think, only they would know that. And your soulmate suddenly understood why warning you mattered so much. Not because they wanted you suspicious of everyone, but because they did not want familiarity to be mistaken for authenticity. Don't skip, because this realization brought out a side of your soulmate they had been avoiding for a long time, the part of them that still feels responsible for protecting the truth between you. They began thinking about how easily a believable sentence can shape an emotional decision. If you received words that appeared personal, you would naturally trust them more. You might think your soulmate had chosen distance. You might think they wanted closure. You might even believe they were asking you to move forward without them. And because you value dignity, you might never question it. That possibility stayed with your soulmate. They could imagine you reading something, sitting quietly with it, then making peace with an ending they themselves had never actually chosen. There was no dramatic panic in them. Instead, there was a growing determination to make sure that whatever you decide about them is based on something real. And that determination forced them to confront another uncomfortable truth. They had spent too much time communicating indirectly even before today. Sometimes they allowed mutual friends to carry information. Sometimes they hoped their actions would say what their words could not. Sometimes they believed that if the connection was meaningful enough, you would simply understand what they meant without them explaining it. Today showed them how fragile that approach can become. When two people rely on implication, the space between intention and interpretation becomes very wide. Anyone can fill that space with assumptions. Your soulmate sees that now. The warning they want to give you is no longer only about one message or one person. It is about breaking the entire pattern. From now on, if it concerns me, I want you to hear it from me. That sentence carries more change than it seems. It means they are finally willing to become accountable for their own voice. It means no more expecting you to decode silence. No more letting other people explain what they supposedly feel. No more allowing uncertainty to speak louder than honesty. Stay till the end, because once they made that decision internally, something surprising happened. They stopped feeling as focused on what the third party had done and started thinking about what they themselves wanted to say to you. The energy shifted from investigation to intention. Instead of replaying every misleading comment, they started imagining the first honest conversation between you in a long time. What would they say first? Would they explain today's discovery immediately? Would they apologize for believing things without asking you? Would they admit that part of them had wanted an excuse to stay distant because distance felt safer than vulnerability? That last realization was difficult. Your soulmate began to see that the third party's influence only worked because it entered a place where uncertainty already existed. If they had been completely confident, they might have asked you directly. If they had been emotionally ready, they might have challenged the assumptions sooner. But they were not ready. Some part of them was afraid that the truth might confirm their deepest concern that you had genuinely moved on. So when someone told them something that supported that fear, they accepted it because it allowed them to avoid finding out for themselves. That is an important distinction. Your soulmate is not simply discovering what someone else did. They are discovering why they were willing to believe it. And that level of self-awareness is changing them. They are recognizing that protecting themselves from disappointment also protected them from possibility. They avoided the chance of hearing no, but they also avoided the chance of hearing something completely different. Maybe that is why today feels almost like a reset. Not a magical reset where the past disappears, but a realistic one where someone finally understands the mistake well enough to stop repeating it. Something important is waiting for you in that understanding. Your soulmate is no longer fantasizing about returning to some perfect version of what you once had. They are thinking about something more grounded, meeting you where you are now. Finding out who you have become. Letting you discover who they have become. Allowing a new conversation to exist without demanding that it recreate an old relationship. That possibility feels both unfamiliar and strangely peaceful. Because if there is still something meaningful between you, it should be able to survive honesty. And if there is not, honesty will still give both of you something silence never could, clarity. Your soulmate is beginning to value that more than any specific outcome. But there is another reason they feel compelled to reach you sooner rather than later. The third party's draft contained one line suggesting that your soulmate was about to make a major personal decision specifically to move away from you emotionally. The problem was simple: no such decision existed. Your soulmate had not said it, planned it, or even considered it in the way the message implied. Seeing that sentence made them realize how quickly an invented conclusion could become your reality if you believed it came directly from them. So they began writing their own message. Not to compete with anyone. Not to convince you of anything. Just to establish one clear point before confusion had another chance to grow. The first version was too long. They deleted it. The second sounded defensive. They deleted that too. The third was simpler: there's something I learned today, and I need you to hear my side directly. They stared at that line for a while. It felt vulnerable because it opened a door they had spent a long time keeping closed. But for the first time, vulnerability did not feel like weakness. It felt like responsibility. Your soulmate realized they had asked themselves for months whether reaching out was the right thing to do. Today, the question changed. Now they were asking whether remaining silent was actually fair to you. That shift mattered. Silence had always felt neutral before. Safe. Respectful. Today they understood that silence can also allow misunderstanding to harden into belief. So they added another sentence: if you've heard anything about what I supposedly decided, please don't assume it came from me. And then they stopped. Because those words carried a larger truth they could no longer avoid. If they sent that message, you would probably ask what they had actually decided. And your soulmate knew they would finally have to answer. Not what the third party said. Not what circumstances suggested. Not what they thought would be easiest. What they actually wanted. That was the real turning point. For everything they had uncovered today, the hardest discovery was still inside themselves. They wanted the chance to speak with you. They wanted to know whether the connection between you had been misunderstood rather than truly finished. They wanted to understand the story without intermediaries. And, quietly, they wanted to know whether hearing their voice again would still mean something to you. They could not guarantee what would happen after that. They did not want to pressure you. They did not want to arrive carrying expectations that belonged to the past. They simply wanted one honest opening. One conversation that belonged only to the two people whose feelings had been discussed by everyone except themselves. And as your soulmate prepared to send the message, they noticed something that stopped them for a completely different reason. The draft connected to the third party had a timestamp. It had been edited today, only a short while before your soulmate discovered it. But beside that timestamp was another detail, something showing that the message had not yet been sent. It had been scheduled. And when your soulmate saw exactly when it was meant to reach you, they realized they still had a small window to make sure the first thing you heard was the truth.